So thank you all for being here. This week's session hasn't started with DJ drinking instant coffee, which is already an improvement on last week's. I was mortally offended by that. He apologised to me one-to-one for drinking instant coffee afterwards, so we're friends again now.
It wasn't instant coffee. I have some instant coffee too.
So I haven't got a topic that I am like focusing on talking about this week, but I have a question that I put into the V3 channel earlier to ask around how people feel things are going and how people think we can do a better job of supporting you and how we can increase the chance of this all being a dramatic success. So that's going to be the theme of the call. Vic, I'm just muting you because I can just hear a bit of background noise from you, but please unmute yourself whenever you want to speak. It'd be great to hear from you. So yeah, that's going to be the theme that we come to in a little bit. But I always like to spend the majority of these calls just chatting about any questions or thoughts or anything people have got. And also I can give you an update on some of the stuff that's been happening in the last week. So I'm going to start there. Also on a personal note, I've started making some progress on the actual website bit, which is exciting. We talked a little bit in the last one of these about the vlog series I'm doing on that. I've put two of them out now, a second one since this last call. If you haven't watched it, feel free to watch it. Your feedback is very appreciated. Eric told me there needs to be more code in them, so I'm going to try and upgrade the levels of code in those while making it not too Rails specific, Ruby specific. But I'm trying to approach that by finding the questions that I don't know the answers to and coding those first, because that feels like the most useful way to work out where, well, my blind spots, I was going to say our blind spots, but primarily my blind spots are, and then hopefully crowdsource some of the solutions to those problems. So I've started by thinking about the flow of files coming in from both CLI and the in-browser side. We've got two very distinct code paths at the moment in V2, one for the research experimental in-browser coding stuff and one for the traditional CLI stuff that's quite mature. So I've been thinking about how to bring those together, how to bring analysis, representation and test running together. One interesting realization I had that I'm not convinced it's in any way a useful realization, but it was an interesting one, is that I've been sort of presuming that there was like a linear, a natural linear order between running the tests on a solution, looking for representation, and then going to an analyzer. And as I was coding it, I decided that I wanted to do all three of these things asynchronously anyway, because I want to get the quickest response of whichever of those things is relevant. I want sort of a 10-second end-to-end response, whether the test pass or fail, whether a representer is relevant or not, or whether analyzer is relevant or not. But one of the things I realized was actually, if there is a representation, then we know the tests have passed, because we'll never ask for a representation on failing tests. So there's actually like little shortcuts we have there where if we have an existing representation, we wouldn't theoretically even need to run the tests. Equally, if an analyzer returns a positive thing, then we immediately know the code is compiling and probably running. So there's some interesting things there. The reason this sort of maybe becomes a bit more interesting as well is when we're talking about WebAssembly and running people's code in the browser. For some languages, it will be more expensive time-wise to run the test than it will be just to generate an AST representation and see whether that's in the database. And so actually getting the user's computer to generate that representation and pop that to us, and then for us to look up if there's any feedback on that representation, might actually halve the time that it takes for a user to get a response. So this was just a bit of a random thing, but it made the shape of analyzers, representers and test runners and the way they interact with each other change a little bit. And also thinking about which of those gets precedence. If we have a representation back, we want to give that feedback, and we can just tell the person their tests have passed without actually waiting for the test runner to pass. So just in terms of coding this bit of stuff, which isn't particularly relevant for any of you, but it might be interesting just to think about the order of those things and the presumption that I had around them doesn't necessarily hold. So that's been probably the most interesting sort of thing that I hadn't expected in doing that. I've also started working last night. I did a bit of an epic code sprint. I finished at 3 a.m., which is something that I don't recommend. What was concerning was I was still talking to DJ at that point, and it was 4 a.m. for him. So, but yeah, I ended up filing a Rails bug report at 3 a.m. So you can imagine slightly how my evening went. But yeah, I started working on the credits and the reputation and the badges side of things, which is interesting. Looking at acquiring reputation, acquiring and spending credits, just sort of the transactions around that, the sort of row locking stuff. There's a load of interesting like database integrity stuff in that. So anyway, I'll talk about all this on a vlog, but that's sort of an update generally on what I've been working on. We've now implemented a limitation that all file names need to be alphanumeric, plus hyphens, underscores, and dots, because we need to be able to write files to S3, and we can hash those and do things with them, but then when they come out the other end on a file system for the test to be run, we want to make sure we're not encoding very weird characters in there, because that's a bit of an attack vector. So one of the rules we're implementing is that stubs and the files that students upload need to conform to those alphanumeric standards. DJ mentioned that in the side. Eric's been working on some more exercises. We have a series about wizards and warriors. Eric, do you want to talk about that briefly?
Yes, so the theme was about wizards and warriors, sort of RPG style, and it's all about getting busy with doing class design. So object-oriented programming. We have an exercise on classes, constructors. There is now one on inheritance. There is one on method overloading that's being reviewed as we speak. So there are some things there, and basically there are two themes. One is the Wizards and Warriors, and the other one is remote controlled cars. So I have two of those exercises built on each other. So they reuse the themes a little bit. So there is some reuse of the stories, albeit applied to a slightly different context. And then you can see how, hey, with my previous knowledge, I would have solved this way. But if you then see, hey, this is how inheritance works, I might have been able to use inheritance too, and it might actually be better. Although in many cases, inheritance won't be better, but that's an aside.
Cool. Thank you. I really liked reading the exercises. They sounded really fun to do, which I was excited about. So if you are a maintainer of a language that has object-oriented stuff, those are some really nice targets to bring over. I think certainly the first of those with inheritance, we can pretty much copy and paste into Ruby, which is sort of where my brain is when I'm considering this stuff. So that's exciting. One for Pablo. Yeah, so that's been good. We've made no further progress on the wizard, not the wizard and the object-oriented. This is complicated. The wizard, the concept exercise making wizard, which we talked about in the last couple of videos. I want to progress on that next week because I think it's important. But we've sort of got pulled into other things. But we will get that done for you. What other interesting things have happened? Eric and I recorded a video yesterday that I'm going to edit over the weekend and upload. And this was on the proof of concept that Brooke talked about in the last call. So this is the problem with the config JSON exercise specific files where we were having to have a sort of one-to-one mapping between JSON and tests in order to output the right test results to a browser that everyone that's worked on the research experiment has moaned to me about. So Brooke came up with this idea of solving this by automatically analyzing the ASTs of our tests to parse out the test specific stuff. So parse out the assertions, parse out any information like that, and just show to the user the actual code that's being run and the expected value. So Eric's just linked in the chat to a proof of concept of that. It works really, really well. We've recorded a video on it that is going to be it's just a chat for about 30 minutes of us discussing the principles behind this in a bit more detail, and then Eric talking a little bit with code as to what he's done. So I'll try and get that out over the weekend or very early next week. Hopefully that will be a fun watch. If anyone does other stuff like that they think would be cool to record some videos on, please let me know. I'm happy to record stuff, and I think Eric and I are going to try and do some more of these because they're quite quick and easy and fun to do. Eli's just linked to an issue. Let me just check.
Yes, and speaking of which, I also posted the results of my POC too in text. So if you scroll down on that issue, you find this comment, which goes into a little bit more detail on what I did. It's also in the video, so if you prefer video, just watch the video when Jeremy has edited it. And please don't be too harsh. It was my very first interview, so it might be a little bit rough on the edges, but I hope it comes across.
My editing skills will smooth out your rough edges, don't worry.
Yeah, just do special effects everywhere. So
exactly, that's the plan.
Wizard hat that just appears.
Exactly. I'm gonna go wild. It's my whole weekend sorted. It's gonna be fun. So I think those are the main updates. I mean, obviously, lots of tracks have been plodding along. Does anyone have an update about anything they've been working on that they would like to share?
We have a lot of new exercises on JavaScript. We have 2 or 3 more open SPRs. We've also started doing part 2 of a story. For this time, it's the magician story for arrays. So we're purposely splitting up array analysis, array transformations, and basic arrays, and that will probably work for most languages. So if you want to do a quick 3 exercise implementation with your enumerable, your list, your arrays, or whatever, you can just copy and do that. We've also found that splitting them up on basically transformation/mutation and analysis works really well when you're actually doing these exercises, because you'll only be targeting a specific subset of the array or enumerable interface. And we have a few new contributors that also joined our contributor pool with actually doing these exercises. So I just want to shout out, Rishi actually just disconnected, but he's one of them who's been doing some of that work.
Awesome. Thanks, TJ. Anyone else have anything else they want to share? Well, anyone is thinking about that. Tim Ninja just asked a question in the side, which was, do students only see one editor in the file, one file in the editor? This is why I shouldn't drink coffee, Eric's right. That was a reference to a conversation that happened before this started recording, for anyone watching this back that thinks that's a really weird conversation to find. So do students only see one file in the editor? So yes and no. So there is one solution file that they are able to edit for most languages. There will be some languages that have header files, in which case they will see a header file. I think it was Java maybe recently that pointed out that each class needs to be in its own file.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So this whole thing might fall apart in that situation, and we might need more than one file for those. I think if people ever want to have more than 2 files, I'm going to get stressed, because that's just making a hole in my presumptions fall apart. So I think ideally, we'll stick to that. For concept exercises, you won't see the test file. For practice exercises, you will see the test file. And that's just because otherwise we'd have to rewrite all the practice exercises, which wouldn't be a good thing to ask people to try and do. So at least initially, we're going to stick to that sort of TDD methodology for the practice exercises. But the concept exercises, as everyone that's been contributing knows, have steps that someone works through instead, which sort of work a little like TDD, but without actually seeing the tests. So yeah, does that answer that for you, Tim? Cool, great. Does anyone have anything else update-wise, or any questions, or should we just hand over to Eli for his normal question bout? I'm relying on you, Eli.
We started working on the NIM test runner. I just
awesome.
started contributing to the NIM track, maintaining, I guess you could say.
Welcome. That's awesome. Thank you. It's really good how much of the tooling is getting done. Like even if we don't get concept exercises, just having those test runners done allows those tracks to be used in the in-browser coding for V3 in practice mode. So that's a great sort of thing just to get checked off and done at the beginning. And I think they're also quite fun to write. So welcome. Thanks for your work on that. I've appreciated all of your comments on Slack as well. It's great to have you here. Anyone else have anything? DJ suggests banning Java from V3 and telling everyone to update to Kotlin. I'm not going to answer that. I don't want to.
Yeah, that looks
It
like
wasn't
a
a question.
Go on,
little
Edo.
trap. Yeah, quick question on the file naming. So that restriction, does that apply to the student supplied input, or does that also apply to files in the V3 repo?
So that's a good question. So one of the challenges, always answer a simple question with a long convoluted answer, sorry. So one of the challenges is that we don't currently enforce which files a student is allowed to overwrite. So we give a student a project and then they can do what the hell they like and they can submit it. And then effectively we pass that on to an analyzer that runs the code. An analyzer is not such a problem because it's analyzed, but test runners will just run that code package. Now, from my understanding, in certain languages, and I might be wrong in this, but I think for something like Java again, you might end up when you create a lot of those files with a project path that's quite a few directories deep that doesn't necessarily have predictable strings in it because it might be personalized to you. So it's quite hard for us to absolutely name those files. So we have an ignore pattern in the config.jsons and a test pattern. And anything that's in the ignore pattern doesn't get past the test runner, and anything that's in the test pattern gets overwritten. We override the student's solution. So if a student uploads bobtest.rb, we will override that with the test file that was the original one because it uses that pattern. But we effectively let students add whatever they like. And because practice exercises in V2 don't have stubs, that's something we have to do really at the moment. So the short answer is that it only applies to files that students can upload. The thing we're trying to protect against is the attack vector of somebody injecting bytes into a string that cause some sort of badness somewhere. Hashtag ops. And I think as part of that, it would almost be quite nice to be able just to check every file that we put there conforms to that, because it just gives us a really robust guarantee of what we're uploading to S3 and what we're putting on someone's computer. I know that for some tracks, they have things like $ and other stuff in there that as part of the file names that are meaningful. So for those, there might be a wider set than alphanumeric and dash and hyphen that we can do, but it would ideally be something that's safe on S3 and safe on a Linux file system. DJ.
Yeah, I think we also are trying to make it work across Windows file systems. We've had a few instances now of someone merging something into V3 that completely breaks the repository on Windows. And if we do this for file names, then we basically solve all those issues altogether, apart from the attack vectors and everything. So this is not about the content of the file. The file's contents can be whatever you want. It's just normalized naming.
Yeah, if we need $, yeah. Where you see this being a problem?
My hands are dirty, so I can't link it right now. But I think we merged. I think Eric knows. Eric, what did we merge?
What? Basically,
it broke on your system first.
Yeah, it was by Brooks. So Brooks did a merge, and he had, I think, less than signs. No, I think less than signs. So we had a placeholder for a slug that's between the HTML format, but that completely broke my Windows system, and I couldn't do anything. So
so basically, what happens on Windows, it will let you fetch, but it won't let you pull, and you can't
Yeah.
fix it.
Yeah,
You
precisely.
you literally cannot do a git checkout and a branch.
Nope.
It will literally tell you, hey, I fetched the repository, but I cannot reproduce this on your system. Go figure it out. So that was the issue I tried to solve, and then Jeremy came with, oh, but we're actually gonna probably archive these and upload them, and then you can just solve all those attack vectors, almost all of them, by doing the same thing. Just don't allow those characters inside file names.
Jeremy, you said that we don't have stubs for V2, and you're correct. We don't have them for all the tracks. But if I recall correctly, Katrina both made issues for each and every track that they should have stub files. So it was actually in the planning for every track to have those. I don't think the tracks got around to doing that.
No, we made this decision like January last year, I think 2019.
Yeah.
And then, priorities probably shifted for people. The problem is there are a lot of unmaintained tracks they've got good content. So we always have a series of legacy there.
It could be a really simple script, because a stub file can be an empty file as long as there's a file.
True.
So I could even create stubs if I just know the convention that the language uses.
Yeah, so for most tracks, I've actually indexed that in the track maintenance dashboard. There is a regex or a slug you can just copy, and you can use that to generate it for almost every single track in the system right now. So you can use that. I don't know, my 2 cents. Good luck with that. I love you, whatever. Not it.
It's not high on my priority list, but...
Does anyone have another question? Or any updates or anything generally?
Can I ask a question about the test runner?
Yes.
For compiled languages, when do specific tests throw errors? Because as per Eric's answer in the Slack, it seems that either compilation errors are general, top level errors, and uncaught exceptions are test failures, not exceptions. So for compiled languages, when do they have error message specific errors?
So if the test can't be run, it's a top level error. So those are usually compile errors because there is something wrong with the syntax or whatever. If everything compiles, the top level error message should never be set again, because then it's actually the user code that fails. It's not the test code that can be run. So if the user code will throw an exception, it will do a stack overflow, whatever, it's basically a single test that's failing, or possibly every single test, but you get the point. It only influences the bit on the test. So that's how it should work.
In those situations, the test its status should be error rather than fail. So if the test is just throwing an arbitrary exception for some reason, that would be an error. If there is a expected versus actual where there's a difference, that would be a fail.
So like null pointer exceptions, overflows, those kinds of things would be test specific errors.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Anything else from anyone? Okay. If anyone wants to ask anything, feel free. Oh, Jude just unmuted or appeared, one of the two. Muted. So earlier on the V3 channel, I posted a list of the current state of the tracks. I got caught out by Rust and Clojure because while Rust has 2 exercises and Clojure have 1, none of them are in their config.json files, which broke the initial script that Eric had written to check the config.jsons. But it's fine. He wrote an updated script that now tells you how many files, how many exercises exist and when they're not in the config.json. So that's a nice extra bit of debugging. So there's a few there. If you can look in V3, have a look. If not, we've got sort of C#, F#, which obviously Eric's working on, are both above 10, then JavaScript and Elixir 7 and 6, and then Ruby and Go 4 and 3, Julia and Rust 2, and then Clojure, Common Lisp, C++, PureScript, and Python at 1. So I put that out there, and I sort of said to people, I said to you, I guess, how do people feel about this? Like, pure numbers are meaningless without, you know, some context. So we can look at that and we can say, okay, we only have one Python exercise, but I know there are loads of Python issues that have been written, for example. And I know we've got, you know, 3 or 4 really good Python maintainers who I've got a lot of faith in to get us to 40 exercises in the next 2 or so months. But obviously, you still look at it and there's one exercise, and that's marginally scary. So I sort of want to get a feel on this call really from everyone as to where you feel your tracks are at, whether you feel like, you know, we're at the start of a rolling stone gathering moss and it's going to be fine, but we just have to get through over some initial humps and then some momentum will kick in, or if we're going to sort of be with similar numbers come a month and a half and then try and be in 2 weeks writing 40 exercises. And then I guess coming out of that, where we're trying to get to in terms of how we can help make this better. So your pitch weighed in with some honest and helpful comments and that I thought were great. I think the probably the key thing he said is lowering the barrier to entry for writing a concept exercise is critical, which, you know, is what we're trying to do with this wizard and something we've highlighted as well. So that's a key thing. I do feel we get a lot of people who want to contribute, and then this first hump is so big they just never get past that. I feel like once you've written your first exercise, the second one is an order of magnitude easier to do. Eric now seems to be able to bash them out. I mean, that's what Eric's doing as a day job, but you know, the time to create a new exercise for Eric is small now, relatively speaking, because just of the momentum of having done 10, 13, however many he's done.
Yeah, and I have the disadvantage that I have to build them from scratch too.
Yeah.
So other tracks can reuse things that have already been done, although that was one of the points that your pitch mentioned that people should be very careful about, which I agree with. Although I'm not sure if we don't allow people to port, if that would not halve the contributions. So it's a little bit of a trade-off.
I think just
and I always think we can make these things better later too. So we'll definitely won't be at 100% when we launch. We'll definitely do fixes, but we have done that always, also with the problem specification based V2 exercises. But so I read a comment about somebody that ported an exercise and it completely didn't work for their language, which is totally fine. It's too bad that they invested time in it, but you find you also get to learn your language a bit. So I ported some things from C# to F#, and at first it seems like I can do almost like a reggae replace, and then you try to build it, and then you think, oh no, I really have to rethink things a bit. And I do. So I modify the exercise, but still there is a lot that I can reuse. I can reuse what information I have in the instructions, etc. Sometimes parts of how the introduction flows. For example, which information do you start with and what do you continue with? So it might not be easy to port everything, and we shouldn't do that. But there's so much in existing exercises that you can reuse, even if you're not actually reusing the actual code.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think it's a critical thing. A critical part of making this work is going to be having a lot of that work done. One thing I've been thinking about on this is that different people are going to bring different skills into what they can contribute here. And I feel at the moment we're not necessarily maximizing that. So there's going to be a degree of some people who like coming up with the ideas, some people who are going to be good at writing the test cases, some people that are going to be, you know, comfortable just putting all the supporting files and nonsense together that I would absolutely hate doing. We have like people who naturally just get attracted to the different bits of these things. And I do wonder if by asking people to put together these big PRs with all of these files, and it's quite complex, we are almost asking too much of one person and not relying on the wise crowd effect of having a group of people. Part of me still wonders, if we've got instructions, introduction example or something, do we merge that to master with a live flag in the config.json set to false for that exercise, and then other maintainers can come along and just iterate on those bits time by time by time. So we're almost getting like, 10, 20, 30 partially complete exercises there, but then all it takes is a couple of people just to have a little blitz at the end to do some of that legwork, which is maybe the unpleasant and fun bit, but actually you'll then be like, you'll be getting that track live at the end. So that's just saying I've been wondering is how we can try and shorten that process initially, and also make use of the different skills, times. Like, some people happily just do shit jobs because they want to contribute to Exercism, but they don't have time to sit there for 5 hours working out a whole brand new exercise. But they might just happily throw some files together that take half an hour but aren't that fun. So I wonder about how we can try and use the different contributors in the team, those sorts of things, to try and make things better. I don't know if anyone has anything they would want to say about that.
So
I think one of the things. Oh, sorry.
No,
You
you
go,
can
Johnny.
continue.
I want to hear from you first.
Oh, sorry. So what I like about it is indeed that you can reuse people's skills where they are properly applied. My only worry would be that people might not understand what the original author intended to do. So I think it will be, we need to be clear that this is the original author, and please contact the author if you have any questions.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even contact them before you have any questions. So just that you don't go off building on existing exercise stuff and go in a different direction that the author intended.
Mm-hmm.
So it might not be that bad after all, but well, yeah.
I think even for myself, I would happily get a lot of exercises 2/3 of the way there, and then just have a sort of painful week just before launch where I do all the tidy up, because it will feel like that's going to get me over that final hump. It's like the prize is in sight there of being able to launch this track, whereas at the moment the prize feels very far in the distance. What were you going to say, Johnny? I don't know how I'm pronouncing your name. Johnny?
Yeah, Yoni's good.
Johnny, cool.
So I was thinking that we could have either like simple as a Slack channel that people say, like each maintaining track, people say, okay, I love running tests. If anyone has an idea, doesn't want to write tests, I'm happy to help. And people would just list their preferences and how to help, and then people can collaborate. So that people are good at writing stories, people are good at writing out the bet, like the, I don't know what you call it, like the ideal solution, most idiomatic solution. People, and then all of the config stuff, so people would be able to collaborate on that.
And that's a really good idea. So, I mean, Jop just said that in Python, like most of the Python exercises are in the discussing phase. And I think what encourages me for Python is that all of the exercises they're being talked about on these issues. So a little like what you're saying, Yanni, it's like it's not necessarily happening in Slack, it's happening on those GitHub issues for Python, but it feels like all of the problems and the questions are being answered on the issues, and then it's almost like someone's just got to type that up into an exercise afterwards. Which is why I feel like I look at Python, it's got one exercise, but I feel very hopeful about Python because I know all that activity is happening in the background to sort of set the scene. So yeah, I think the thing I feel a bit sad about, in the way I hoped that each of the tracks would end up with a maintaining team that were like working together to build stuff. And I feel like that's not really happened. I feel like it's one person's pushing a pull request and then getting a few reviews from other people. It doesn't feel like self-autonomous mini teams, which is sort of what I had hoped we'd be able to achieve. I don't know why that is. I don't know if that's a failing on behalf of me in terms of bringing those people together, whether there's just a natural sort of difficulty in doing that. but certainly I'll be interested to try and work out how we can get more tracks, I guess, functioning like the Python track. That feels like one of the places where there is a team of people. I think maybe like Rust and C# have got that a little bit. JavaScript's got like sort of DJ in his golden tower, and then a sort of load of other newer contributors who are sort of, that feels like it's working in a slightly different way to Python, but it's still working quite well. So Sasha just mentioned as well about this idea of hack days we've talked about. I think that's a really good thing that I should definitely get off my ass and get sorted, because that could really help with this. But I'm interested in, if people have thoughts on how we can make that happen, how we can get these autonomous teams that I can keep my nose out of, and then just magic can happen. Eli.
Yeah, I guess I'm in something of a unique position, because I think the Rust track, we're kind of in that early stage. We've got two, I would almost say three, because I think Sean's work on the latest PR is practically done. There's some more tidying, but I'm planning to merge it. I think how I feel, how do I feel about the track, right? That was the question. So I feel behind. I do think there's a lack of maybe maintainer team cohesion. Like, I think there's very talented singular individuals, but it seems like most of us in the Rust maintaining group are pretty strapped for time, or there hasn't necessarily been coordination of a maintenance review or like a pull request review process. So that was an observation that came out of a recent contribution, is that we need to establish additional guidelines for what we're going to approve. Because I think, say in the nature of Rust, it's a language that has more particularities that matter, and that maybe we want to, as a maintaining team, enforce and say, hey, we should do this, and we'll require it, as far to kind of preempt some of the noise in the pull request review. I think that needs to be in our document, because I don't think it's fair to people just walking in. To your point about what are barriers, I think that's a barrier. If I'm coming in and pull requesting, and I know some Rust, but I don't know maybe this locality's emphasis on certain things, it's going to be, discouraging perhaps. And so I think, that's on like our team trying to make that clearer. And I think for me, some of it's just a time level. Like, I feel like hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll get a bit more time to really get to the busy work of porting these concept exercises. I do feel confident there's a lot of material that I won't have to think about, which is great. So like, thank you, Eric, and everyone else. Like, because again, I have all these other tracks to look at and just be able to say, I'm not coming up with a wizard story. I'm just going to translate this idiom into Rust, right? So I think for me, it's just really sitting down, heads down, focused work, and then using that to further guide the outside contributor process, and maybe come up with ideas about, okay, how do we delineate things more clearly so that people feel comfortable just diving in if you're just some user from, say, the Rust ecosystem and you heard about Exercism.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. DJ?
So I think the biggest issue we've been having, well, first I want to say, if you really want people to contribute, you have to create the issue. I've seen it as soon as I created the issue, I got people asking me one-on-one if they can do something. And before that, I opened up, hey, you can do whatever you want. And people said, I will, but they didn't. It seems that actually one of the hardest barriers is, what will I be working on? And if you create that first issue, that seems to be, I maybe even 80% of the entire hurdle. Like, I just put down with the concept. Yeah, just the concept.
You're talking issues like the one that Jacques just linked to?
I don't know what you just linked to. Let me see. No, I would not like to confirm my account recovery settings GitHub. Implementing. So there's two. Yeah. So there's two types of issues. These. So this one. So maintainers, I would suggest you spend the time creating these, because once you have them.
Someone watching this back, sorry, this is like, we'll have it in the link, but this is a concept discussion where it talks about a concept, what we want an exercise to look like for this concept, and then there's a whole load of discussion underneath that about questions that Jacques been answering or suggestions.
So when you create these issues, you actually get people wanting to contribute. I do have an issue in my track, or it's not an issue, it's just a challenge, that people don't want to discuss it. They just want to work. And I've decided that I'm going to be okay with that. Here's the work basically comes after. So you might get a PR that is, it's not shit as a PR because it's work, right? Someone spent the time, but it just won't work as is. And then there are basically 3 options or 3 cases. The biggest we have is English. A lot of my main contributors are really bad at English, but they're really good in doing the work and doing the legwork. So what I've been doing the past 2 weeks, which has really helped because I'm also very time constrained, is review, have them have a second take. They usually do that. Then merge it, then do the last half hour of work myself, PR it, and tag one of the staff members or one of my co-maintainers or Eric or whatever, and we just get it merged so that it's not in a broken state. And then I create an improvement issue, and that seems to work really well. Then you actually get people who don't want to write a complete exercise, but they're like, oh no, I'll improve this exercise. And I do see that it's different people who want to do that type of work.
There's someone, they might be on this call, hello, if you are, emailed, and they were like saying, they're doing a PhD but most of their interest is in teaching, and it's like, they're native English, they are English. I think they're the sort of person that's going to, like, they're not, I don't think, a particularly experienced software developer or anything, but a sort of person that's going to take an exercise that could do with a bit of polishing from an English language point of view, from a just, teaching skills point of view, and they can just add that layer to it. But if you ask that person to start from scratch, you're giving them this massive barrier of having to learn, think, all of the stuff that, everyone here has been on that journey, if they've contributed, and it is a challenge. So I think that, and that's a really interesting sort of two-phase thing, DJ, thinking of these improvement issues. And maybe that's something that we need to try and enforce that workflow of a little bit more. It goes back to what Eli was saying, which is what are the standards that each track is going to try and put in place? And maybe there is a sort of, I'll merge this, but these things aren't quite met, and we need to put another issue up that says before this can go live, these things need to be adhered to. Certainly, I think for the English language stuff, merging it and then doing a second pull request later down the line where you tidy up the English, I'm fine with. I'm going to try and just put a week aside before we go live and just go on a massive blitz of this stuff.
Real quick, or sorry, DJ, go ahead.
No, that's fine. Say it.
To the point of that other contributor wanting to take a teaching standpoint, I think that'll be a great later stage contribution to even walk through a track and just kind of think about the narrative, right? Live that story, because I think that will itself yield inconsistencies or other things that maybe we didn't see because the tent hadn't been pulled up, right? So I think that sounds like, again, order of operations, it would be helpful later in the game, or chunked in, as you're saying, secondary PR. And I like that idea, DJ, of just having follow-up issues, because then it makes it concrete. If I have 30 minutes and an interest in JavaScript, I could pick up one of those and just run with it. And it's not as involved. I don't have to watch everything about a concept exercise, etc.
Yeah, and it's also just not, you don't have to do all the work yourself. You're not a maintainer because you have to do all the work. And what we've started doing to do this week is, if the exercise has a good basis, but it's just not good enough, but you really want to merge it, you just don't add it to config.json. That is what we've been doing. So it doesn't show up.
Is there an appetite there for a flag in the config.json for active?
No, I would suggest you don't put it in there, but you do create an issue that it has to be added to the config.json. So an exercise is just not finished if it's not in there. I can visualize it on the track maintenance dashboard if there is if people want that, hey, there is an exercise, but it's not inside the JSON. But I think in general, merge more often. You're going to get more contributions from people who don't want to do the next entire exercise. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that's good. I think we need to have a rule there that if something is merged but not going in the config JSON, there needs to be an open issue for it. What I would be really wary about is having
Absolutely.
exercises on mask. We don't know if they're supposed to be in the config JSON. It feels like Rust has got 2 exercises that I presumed are finished but aren't in the config.json because of somebody missing that step. And like that would worry me that I might look at that, and I nearly did earlier, and just put them in the config.json or just PR it to that. But actually, it's like a null column. I don't know if it's missing or if it's deliberately missing or what. So that's sort of why part of me likes the idea of an active flag more, because then it's there, but somebody's made a really specific decision to say this isn't ready yet. That needs PRing to change.
Yeah, I would be personally okay with that. I do tell the original author, if they are active on the issue or on the PR, to create this issue, right? It's still their work. Like, I don't want to make anyone feel like they're not good enough or whatever. But I also, especially, we had this particular one maintainer who basically got 60 or 70 comments, but they're all nitpicks, and they were clearly nitpicks. But he thought, I think it's a he, thought that he was doing a shit job. So in the end, he fixed like 50 of them, and then someone else, oh, you haven't fixed everything. I just merge it. You're good. This has your name. And then, I'll just do this in 10 minutes, which is going to take them an hour. So
I think this is something that I found frustrating, is that often there's a whole load of comments on the pull request that it would literally be easier just to go and fix in a second pull request than it would be get the first one perfect. And this was part of what got me sort of wanting this whole wizard thing, was like, let's get an exercise that's just good enough without having to go through all this. So, I mean, the other thing is, if we don't want an active flag, maybe we have a status flag of something, which is an enum, which is like, basics are there, all the files are there, it's been signed off for its quality of English, I don't know, some checklist, whatever, however we do this. The technical details probably don't matter. Someone's saying bye. DJ saying bye. What? DJ? Bye, DJ. You can say bye properly.
I was already in the exit dialogue, but bye. Talk to you guys later.
Goodbye.
And girl. Bye.
So, yeah, I'm lost without DJ. What do I do? But yeah, I think working out, maybe Eric, this one for you to sort of think about next week. How could we get some of this context of the status of an exercise into play? How can we just, encode a reduction of the work that has to go into getting a pull request merged to make, I want to make that fun. And at the moment, it feels like you do a fun first pass and then it's just like a chore afterwards. I mean, and that's, that's all down to good intentions from everyone, but it does
we might be able to do stuff with the wizard that we generate things to. So for example, the config JSON change is, can be automated. And for the other things, we might be able to do stubs, etc. So we mentioned this last week too, where you might have, for example, a GitHub command convert to actual pull requests with stub files, but maybe slightly shorter. So
let's properly work that out next week, and let's just make sure that we get everyone to tell us what they think about it as well as the week goes on.
As an example of somebody who did it very well, Tim submitted a draft pull request, and he requested feedback. So I think this is a brilliant example of how this can be done. So it's an example implementation. There's an introduction, and there's some design on what he wants to have the exercise be about. And then he requested some feedback, and I chipped in with some of the feedback, and we can, it is easy to review, and it's also easy to correct for the one submitting the pull request. So I'm hoping this is more fun for Tim too. Maybe Tim can say something.
Yes, I just gotta log him in. I'll be.
Oh yeah, sure.
I will lock you. Brilliant.
His colleagues. That's what he mentioned earlier.
He basically runs a Minecraft farm. He breeds children, has them play Minecraft, from what I can understand.
They're all Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin. Yeah, I think this. I made this draft just to kind of get over the hump of the first thing, because I've also, not that I think anybody is meant to be mean or nitpicky. That's how it has felt a few times, because
Yeah,
we
agreed.
have six exercises in, and most of them are mine. So I've been through it a few times here. And so I just kind of wanted to get like the big things out of the way, because I think we had talked about kind of having this like initial stage, and I redid this PR from an old one just to kind of experiment with this. But it did so far feel better to not have to invest so much time in everything. And now that I kind of like have like the not a complete blessing, but I assume like a quasi blessing.
You do.
Doing like the next steps has been much easier to kind of go on. So yeah, I think having this like staged phase in is a really important thing to go forward, at least for myself. And so I think Elixir is making progress. I think I have most of, I think maybe in 2 or 3 more exercises, I think I'll have most of the basic types and kind of like forms covered, so that we can start getting into like interesting things. And I think then people will be hopefully more interested in creating concept exercises, because I find like these early ones are just very tedious and
Yeah.
talk about something but not too much of something.
Yeah.
And
Agreed.
it's really easy to bleed into really fun and interesting things about Elixir, but they need to have the basic things in first. But I think, to DJ's point, like I think I need to spend more time making some actionable items, because there's lots of Elixir mentors, and like when somebody's mentioned something in the Elixir track about like, oh, this is something wrong about this V2 issue, and I'm like, can you make a PR for that? And I'll merge it, and then like 5 minutes later it's there. So I think there is people willing to work. I think they're just busy people, and they just don't have the energy for certain types of work.
Yeah.
So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I tried for the C# track to do something what Python is also doing, just creating issues for exercises. And the thing is, they don't actually have to be that, you don't have to work on them very long. So, for example, let me link to one. It's about exceptions in C#. You can go deep and you can do lots of things, but in the basics, what I want to know is, what do I want students to learn? So it's just a short list. And what is stuff that I want to postpone to other exercises? And you can probably do this for a concept in 5 to 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be complete. If you get it wrong, I get these things wrong, I just fix them in the exercise. It doesn't really matter. And the rest of the stuff in the file is, well, basically do a little Googling on possible resources to refer to. But even that could be postponed if you don't like to do that. If you would just have the things that you want to teach or have a student learn, and the out of scope things, I think you already have something to build on. And I just churned out a lot of these things just by going to the list of all the concepts that are in C# and just picking them one by one and just having VS Code open and almost do like a search and replace. So you don't have to do tons of them, but if you can do a couple, it has indeed helped with C# that people are find it easier to get started with something that's already being described. So the hurdle to discuss things, what can I do, etc., is probably, it's harder for people to do than just have a GitHub issue and say, hey, can I work on this? So
so it'd be interesting to see, considering the Python situation, where we've got a load of these issues that have been done really well. It'd be interesting to see maybe Python taking the next step towards what Tim's done in terms of like a simple pass of the key 3 or 4 files, and like getting those sort of draft pull request things. I mean, we can try and enforce, the wizard thing next week, and you can test that out. But if we're taking Python as an example of where we have got a few, really good maintainers who have done that sort of first big step of legwork, do we then take it to the draft stage? Do we then take it to getting that final set in? because that could be quite a nice case study, if you like, in how we would like it to be done. And that's maybe how Rust then takes it forward, where there's, 3 or 4 maintainers there in Rust as well. I don't know, that feels like it was a sensible approach.
That
So
is actually on the back of my mind, what I have on my list for my free time today and tomorrow is trying to do that. We were trying to get a big push of a certain number of issues logged, and I feel kind of a push-pull because I feel like I should knock out some more issues before I try to do some concept exercises, but I'm also in avoidance mode with the concept exercises because of the work.
Yeah.
So maybe setting myself a specific goal of grabbing 3 of those and drafting them. I really like the idea of drafting them so that we can get the discussion loop going, because I think our team is really good at discussion and feedback. But it's kind of like we're all holding hands and waiting to step forward together instead of, and so it would be nice to see if we could move it through in stages and get
And that's
some
a
momentum.
really, that's awesome. Like, it's something your pitch said earlier that I thought was interesting, when he was saying about how much momentum he gets as a Python mentor, in terms of he can see his mentor score, he can see how many things he's done. And it is a little like that. It's like there's no small steps that I think are easy to take to move things forward, to show a bit of progress. Whereas that sort of next stage that you're talking about of drafting the things, it feels like everyone can take a step together and you can see some progress. And I think with the huge amount that goes into one concept exercise, it can feel really hard to feel like you're getting any progress. Whereas throwing out a few more issues, while valuable, one of the key things is that you can see the progress. There's more issues. So
yeah, you can tick it off the list, and whereas you mount a concept exercise and the phrase "pecked to death by ducks" comes to mind. It's not that any of us intend to do that, but you, as a spectator, you sit and watch that and you think, do I really want to do that? So maybe de-threading that and trying to break it down into smaller steps and just getting it out there to get momentum. At least that's what I'm telling myself.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, let's work on the wizard next week, Jeremy.
Yeah, definitely.
And to Bethany's point, in that experience, I think this could even not require some aspect of a wizard. I think it could just be stating guidelines. I think what would help me is to have something I can point to and say, hey, this is kind of an exercism guide for concept exercises in a track, where let's get an MVP and let's keep, keep the pecking killer ducks at bay. And then we can create, killer duck issues for any subsequent thing. Yeah, it would just help to have that stated, though, because otherwise I'm it falls on me in communication with my team, which I'll helpfully do, because I think it's a shared team thing, but it is something it would be great to have some kind of public thought about that.
So I'm wondering, what would be the absolute minimum that we would consider to be useful for people to submit a pull request for? Would it be just an example?
The files?
Which files?
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my opinion is that you need an example, an introduction.
Well, introduction is already hard to write.
It is, but but it can be loose. But I think you need something that's showing that's the introduction is how much do I have to teach somebody in this thing? Is this going to be
a design document too?
Say again?
So could that also be the design document?
It could be. I mean, I
because
find
the design document is easier to write because it's just listing things.
I would find the introduction easier to write than the design.
Really?
I agree.
Yeah.
Introduction easier than the design?
Yeah. I find it's easier to conceptualize what you're trying to get across than the point form of the.
Oh, I'm surprised. I can train these design documents out, but the introduction can take me hours if I want to do them right.
I think it's
probably
as well.
A difference in Redblend versus Blueblend.
Yeah, I'm a storyteller, as you all know from the fact I ramble on all the time. So that sort of writing prose, talking in prose, becomes a lot easier to me than writing bullet points of things.
All right. So what if we do example plus introduction or design? So whichever people prefer. If for some weird reason you like writing an introduction instead of a design document,
and
Yeah, you
then
do
maybe,
storytellers.
weirdos.
and then maybe a skeleton of the instructions, like
Oh yeah, yeah.
I don't think. I mean, weirdly, the instructions are less important if you've got the example. Like, I looked at the one Tim just posted, and I don't need the instructions because I can see what the methods are. I'm presuming there's going to be an instruction point for each thing in the method. Like,
Yeah.
I would suffice with a couple of comments in the example to start with, but either comments in the example or some instructions. But it feels like it feels to me like if there was an introduction, an instructions, and an example, like I would almost merge that, and then like with a status of this is not ready. But then the writing the tests around an example is like not that hard. It's tightly coupled to the instructions. So
Yeah.
if you and your co-maintainers agree on the instructions, the introduction, and the example, then at some point someone just has to sit down for an hour or two. But there's not like that's just a job. It's not like a creative thing. Whereas the instructions, example, introduction trio feels creative to me. That's yeah.
So in terms of this like staged, I guess, commitment to the repo, is it possible then we can make a quick decision, since Eli has posted that we're at time, about what is the minimum to commit? Are we going to have a flag or optional flag or enum in the config to denote that it's incomplete, but it's like at a certain stage or phase of submission?
Yeah, or a status field or something like that.
And I really like that idea because I think then it makes the PR process much less noisy, and you can say like, we've completed this part, we can move on, and it looks fresh, and then it's easy to then continue to go forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think we 100% do that. I think we need to think through the best way of doing that. The risk, and we need to draw this to a close soon, but obviously the risk is we end up with a load of 50% exercises and nothing that's ready to launch. So I think I'm in many ways less worried about that. I'd prefer that because it feels easier to get somebody in and say like, look, if you can volunteer a few hours of your time just to bash the other 50% of these things, we'll launch. It feels like a very tangible prize at the end of that if a maintainer dropped out after getting half around a load of exercises.
And you get to be an author then too.
Yeah. But I think getting the understanding what those tangible stages are is the key thing, and just thinking through the risk profile of how we get from each stage to the next, while including both the original author's intention, as I think it was Eric that said earlier, is really important. But also, giving that other person just the creative freedom just to get through the task as well. So yeah, I think let's sleep on it over the weekend. It's a long sleep, and then maybe on Tuesday, Eric, you and I just have an hour or two we put aside and we just draft a PR on this that just outlines this guidance with the status things, put it up.
And we should draft an example probably too.
Yeah, draft an example, get feedback from everyone on this call on it, try and get it merged Tuesday, or morning of Wednesday, throw an email out to the maintainers, put an announcement out about it, have a party. Cross our fingers, hope. Okay, that's good. Well, there you go. That's been an incredibly valuable call for getting all those ideas out. If anyone hasn't spoken and has ideas about what we've just said, Eric's about to put an issue up on GitHub that just says, if you're on the call and you want to talk about anything, dump your ideas in here over the weekend. I hadn't told you that before, Eric. That was me telling you. So we'll have an issue up that you can just dump your thoughts into over the weekend, so that Eric and I have got something to look at when we're drafting that.
Specifically on what we just discussed.
Yeah, just if you just put an issue with like a title of like status in progress exercise statuses. If you're on the video call, dump your thoughts here. Everyone then knows that it's there, and we can then pull all those thoughts together on Tuesday, put that together, and we'll go from there. That is time. that was super helpful. It wasn't maybe as exciting as talking about Exercism's future economic growth in terms of credits, but it's probably significantly more tangibly useful in the short run. Thank you, all of you that contributed to that. It's really great. Have a good weekend. Thank you for all you're doing, and yeah, have a nice evening. Bye.